What's up, everybody? Ghost Bros Gaming, Steven here. Today we're going to be going through an in-depth look at the Labrynth deck. So I'm going to be talking tech choices, build types, overall strategy, everything in between. It's going to get really detailed. I'll throw in some chapters so you can skip around if you'd like. Let's get right into it.
Ghost Bros Gaming.
Alright, so first up, one thing I wanted to talk about is a few different broad level ways that Labrynth is being built right now, and I'd say that there are pros and cons to each of these sort of build styles. So we'll talk about both of them. The first one is basically what I call the scorched earth, completely kill the graveyard strategy. So tier is super dominant right now. The one thing that kills them is cards like Dimension Shifter and Necro Valley. As a Labrynth player, you can take advantage of these. I think that this build of the deck is the best version in the TCG right now, just because it counters the deck that literally everybody is playing, tier limits. You drop a D Shifter, that's a turn skip for them. That gives you time to get to your Metaverse and then get your Necro Valley up, which at that point, basically they're scooping unless they're drawing like the Duster or something like that. So I think this build is currently the best version in the TCG. A big drawback to this build is that we use a lot of the best normal traps interact with the graveyard. So think things like Terrors of the Overroot, Dogmatic of Punishment, a lot of these good normal traps. If you're under Shifter or you're under Necro Valley, a lot of these don't work as well as they could, or maybe they don't work at all. So I'd say that if you're gonna go the anti-graveyard D-Shifter build, you really need to fully commit and build your deck only to use cards that work under Shifter and Necro Valley, etc. So the second pretty popular build that exists in the Labrynth community right now is something that's a lot more popular in the OCG, which is sort of this Ishizu Labrynth build, where basically you're playing more copies of the furniture to discard things like Keldo, discard things like Mudora to give you some more graveyard interaction. And then you're using the furniture to sort of refill your hand for this discard fodder for cards like Phoenix Wing Windblast, because it's a very powerful card. It's just sort of like a -1 basically for you if you're not refilling your hand with ammo for the card. So I think one thing to note that people are sort of overlooking with this deck for Ishizu Labrynth is that the reason it's so good, one of the reasons it's so good, is in the OCG, they have Max C at 3. So they can drop Max C and start drawing to basically get more and more discard fodder for things like Phoenix Wing Windblast, which really helps improve the consistency of the deck with this build. For us here in the TCG, I think it will be a little harder to consistently get discard ammunition for cards like Phoenix Wing Windblast. We'll see how it goes. Obviously, if a ban list hits, everything changes. But my opinion right now is that the graveyard nuke strategy is the much better play in the TCG today. Let's talk Big Welcome. So how good is it in this deck? Well, this is just one example of how good Big Welcome really is in this deck. So you can see we're able to gain a ton of advantage off of it because it removes a monster from the field by a normal trap effect. So whether it's our monster or our opponent's, we really don't care. We can bounce the lady, we'll get our lovely effect to hand rip the opponent, we'll get a draw off the Ariana, and then we'll just special summon the lady right back to the field. We can set the skill drain. It's absolutely insane. And then the next turn, we've got the Big Welcome in the grave, so we can use it to bounce another monster, which again just starts to get us popping off again. Lovely Labrynth gets her effect, Ariana gets her effect, and we're just rolling at this point. So I think Big Welcome is going to be insane for the deck. It also gives us more consistency in that it is just 3 more copies of a Welcome Labrynth card. Alright, so let's talk Labrynth main deck monsters. So there's a couple things to get out of the way that are really easy. So Ariana, you play 3 or whatever. The green one, I always forget which is Ariana, which is Ariana, but the green one, you play 3, it's good. Lady, you play 3, it's good. Lovely, you play 1, it's pretty good, but you don't want to draw it. It sucks to draw. So with that out of the way, I think there's a couple things to talk about. The furniture, I think as far as Chandraglier and Stovey Torby, those two, my opinion, are pretty mid. You could play them potentially in the Ishizu Labrynth build, but I think they have a lot going against them. They minus you a lot in a world where you may not actually get them back because you might be under Shifter or you might be under Necro Valley. Or they could get shuffled back in with the Shizu stuff. There's just a lot of ways for them to not find their way back to your hand. And so they really start to minus you a little bit too much, in my opinion. Additionally, when Big Welcome comes out, you actually have more ways to just draw into your Labrynth engine. And so you don't really need the furniture as much, in my opinion. Like, you didn't need it before, and you sure as hell don't need it once Big Welcome comes out. That said, Kuklok is amazing. Like, he is part of the best combo the deck has, which is the ability to set and activate any normal spell trap during your opponent's turn. I have a video for that. I'll link it in the description to show off that combo if you don't know how the combo works. But basically, you can just wait until you see what your opponent's playing, call up the perfect card to like devastate their deck. So if it's Tier, Metaverse into Necro Valley and watch them cry. It's one of the best win cons the deck has going first, and I think you'd be kind of crazy not to play Necro Valley. Not to play Kuklok. So I'd say Kuklok at 1. Oh, the pink one. So the pink one is like, we've kind of seen it being played in the OCG. For some reason, it has to go to the graveyard, which is kind of like annoying. It has to send to the graveyard, which is annoying under Shifter. It won't work. And it might be good with the DDD engine, but like, all things considered, I'm not really considering playing it, especially when Big Welcome comes out. All right, let's talk pots. So one of the fun parts about Labrynth is you can really kind of like choose your own adventure, like whichever one is your personal preference. I think you really can't go wrong with either of these, like any of these three options. There are a few like pluses and minuses to each that I'll talk about real quick. But generally, like, we don't really need the extra deck too much depending on your build. So I think you're pretty safe to run Prosperity or Extrav. I think if you're going heavy on board breakers like Lava Golem and Evenly Matched to help you go second, then Prosperity is probably the correct choice because you can dig 6, and then you could probably find a board breaker if you're digging 6 cards into your deck and you sided enough of them in. That said, Extrav is literally a +1, which this deck really needs card advantage to keep playing, and I think that +1 off Extrav is really, really good. And then a sleeper pick that I don't see a ton of people running, but I really like, is Pot of Duality. I don't think we really need the special summon on turn 1, right? Because Lady can really just special summon herself off the drop of a hat. Like, anytime you do anything for any reason, you're special summoning Lady. And you're usually just setting the Welcome Labrynth anyway on your turn 1. So I really don't think Duality hurts us a ton and gives us sort of that Prosperity-like effect. So, like, I'm actually running 3 Extrav, 2 Duality, and it's been great. Like, if you Extrav into a Duality and then you can Duality to dig 3, it just feels really good to be able to get that exact card you need. So I really don't think you can go wrong with any of these. Just sort of evaluate what you're trying to do with your deck and pick the choice that makes the most sense to you. All right, let's talk about everybody's favorite subject, Floodgates. So a lot of people feel a certain type of way about Floodgates. You might make your locals players hate you. However, I personally think the cards are there, and if your deck isn't inhibited by any of these cards, you should at least consider playing them. Like, it's literally free real estate for Labrynth. We are unimpacted by Goes and Match. We are unimpacted by Rivalry. We are slightly impacted by Necro Valley, but not nearly to the degree that your tier limit playing opponent will be. So I think a lot of these options are pretty good. Again, this is one of those where you can sort of choose what you think is best based on the decks you're expecting to see. I do think in this meta, Necro Valley is absolutely bananas. Like, if you put this card up against tier, like, you basically put them in top deck mode looking for like a Duster or a Heartbeats, because they really have like no way to out this. I also think Goes and Match is really, really good into most matchups. I tend to favor siding Rivalry of Warlords compared to main decking it, just because Rivalry isn't really good into things like Kashtira and Flu, whereas Goes and Match still does something against them. So I think all of those options are pretty good in this format. In the next format, we get another option, which is Skill Drain. So Skill Drain's not really that good right now, just given that we need to be proccing the Labrynth effects. So you need to be proccing your Ariana to draw, you need to be setting traps off of Lady, etc. However, once Big Welcome comes out, we can actually dodge the skill drain and still use our Labrynth monster's effects, which is really cool. So I think skill drain will get really good. Let's take a look at a combo example. All right, so let's take a look at how we can abuse skill drain once Big Welcome comes out. So basically the premise is Big Welcome has an effect on it that allows you to bounce a monster. And so what we're gonna see here in a second on the replay is we can normal summon the Ariana, activate her effect, chain the Big Welcome Labrynth so that we summon the lady and then we bounce the Ariana back to our hand, and her effect will resolve under the skill drain. So let's take a look. And as you can see, the effect resolves. And so you can think of a lot of like dastardly implications for this, right? You can bounce any card you want and have it like resolve under skill drain, which is pretty sweet. This, in my opinion, makes skill drain one of the best floodgates we can run. Again, this is probably assuming a Pearl or Rhino limit or ban, but again, conditional on tier getting hit a little bit, I think skill drain gets really, really good in the next format. Let's take a look at some blowout traps. So, we already know we can set any card, any trap from deck and activate it that turn, which gives us access to some absolutely devastating cards depending on matchups. And so a lot of these I run as one-ofs in the deck. And some of them you could potentially side as well, just depending on the matchup. Once you see what the opponent is playing, then you do your combo. And so if it's a branded, you set the D barrier, call fusion, sorry bud. If you're playing against Runic, you set the E-Rad for spells, boom, sorry. If you're playing tier, Metaverse into the Necro Valley, and that is pretty much game over. They scoop most of the time if the Necro Valley sticks on board. And yeah, Floanderies, Deck Devi, same thing. They're probably scooping at that point. So a lot of different options for like the huge blowout trap cards, but that to me is like one of the most fun aspects of this deck is just being able to like set the exact right trap card for that moment and then just blowing your opponent out with the perfect card. Let's talk removal traps. So the bread and butter of Labrynth obviously is, its ability to get a bunch of grind game out of removal traps. So anytime you're removing things from the field with traps, you're getting a bunch of effects that help net you advantage. There are probably too many to talk about in this video. Like there's so many normal traps that remove things. I'd say overall, the absolute best ones are ones that are not hard once per turn and ones that don't destroy, ones that might like bounce to the hand or return to the deck. So I think compulsory evacuation device is absolutely the best like non-Labrynth in-engine normal trap that we have right now. It's just super, super good. It's really versatile. You can compulse your own cards a lot of the time to get extra value that way too. There's other cards as well, like Ichiroku's Ledger Book I really like. Banish 2 monsters until the end phase, which actually is really, really good a lot of the time. I know they come back, but I think it's still a really good card. And yeah, there's a ton of other cards to mention. If you're not running like the GY nuke build, then Tears of the Overroot is quite a good card. So yeah, there's a ton of options, but ultimately I'd say Compulse is really, so you can kind of choose your own adventure, but Compulse is really the only like mandatory 3 of right now. All right, let's take a look at a potential blowout punish. So there's basically 2 different ways primarily that people go about punishing blowout cards like Lightning Storm, and both revolve around the fact that we can set any normal track from deck. So in this particular case, we're going to be looking at Waking the Dragon. So when Lightning Storm is activated, what we're going to do is we're going to activate the Compulse, and then we're going to chain our lady to set Waking the Dragon from deck. And then once Waking the Dragon is destroyed, we can summon any monster from the extra deck, and we will choose to summon the last warrior from another planet, which literally says neither player can summon monsters, period. So this is a pretty solid blowout punish. It basically, I don't know really many decks that would be able to play around this, so this is a really good one to have in your side deck to protect against card destruction blowouts. Let's have a quick look at our second option for blowout punishes. So the combo remains the same. You are setting a card off of Lady, only this time instead of Waking the Dragon, you are setting Boo Boo Game, which when it is destroyed, it will allow you to target 2 trap cards in your graveyard and set them, and they can be used that turn. So as you can see, we're able to pretty much completely recover our board from the wipe that we had via the Duster. So really, look, we're only down the Boo Boo Game. So that's also a really good option to be able to have if your opponent throws down the Duster. Let's talk back row protection. So game 1, not a huge concern, but game 2 and game 3 post side, you bet your ass your opponent is going to bring the house. They are going to side in the Lightning Storms, they are going to side the Evenly Matches, Cosmics, you name it. People hate back row decks, and as soon as they know you're playing a back row deck, it's coming in games 2 and 3. So you really got to be prepared to protect your back row, or you're going to lose the game pretty quick to a blowout. One thing to note, destruction-based blowouts are actually pretty easy for us to punish. So I think things like Lightning Storm and Duster we can punish with things I mentioned earlier, like Boo Boo Game or Waking the Dragon. So really, like, the main nemesis, the card that just kills this deck, is Evenly Matched. And so with that in mind, I mean, the goated, back row protection, Solemn Judgment, you gotta play 3, you gotta side 3 in when you're going first post side. It's mandatory. You will lose if you are not doing that. Honorable mentions, though, I do think that a pointer is pretty solid. It is settable from the deck, just like Erad is, because it's normal trap, so you can snipe the Evenly Matched potentially. And then with Erad, you can, if your opponent just, does the classic do nothing, enter battle phase, then in the battle phase, you just set your Erad, you Erad them for traps, you blow up the Evenly Matched, and you keep playing the game. So I think those are both really good options. Like, all 3 of those cards, I usually side in to try to deal with Evenly Matched specifically, because that is definitely the most dangerous card for us. Honorable mention to Lord. I actually like him. I know a lot of people are pretty divided on this one because he is kind of slow, and he takes up a spot that could be like another normal trap. But personally, I like him a lot of times going second, actually. In the event that you're playing against tier, a lot of times you just want to set 5 and pass. And if you do that, they're going to obviously shuffle a few cards in the end phase and pop one of your back row with Pearl or Rhino. If you have the Lord, you can actually protect against that, which is really great. And setting an Extravagance for next turn never hurts. So I still like Lord. Maybe I'll reconsider that in the future, but I think all these cards are good options, but really the goated ones, Solemn Judgment and Eradicator for sure. Go second cards. So there's, again, a little bit of a split in the community between running like the hard go second cards, like the really, really good board breakers such as Sphere Mode, Lava Golem, Evenly Matched. Some people are even main decking Evenly Matched, and that's certainly a perfectly fine way to go. Those cards are some of the best in the business at cracking the opponent's board. However, my personal opinion is those cards are not as versatile for going first. So if you win the dice roll game 1 and you draw into some Evenly Matched, you're potentially at a pretty big disadvantage when you should be at an advantage because you're going first. And so an alternative method to board breaking is to run things like Goes and Match, Waybridge in the future. I will certainly be running Rivalry of Warlords, all of these cards that force your opponent to send cards to satisfy their condition alongside Solemn Strike. And so what you can do is, you just set 5. If you lose dice roll, you set 5, pass, get to their draw phase, flip the Goes and Match. Even if they have a monster effect negate on board, you just strike the negate and it's a higher spell speed. So unless they have a counter trap, that chain is resolving right there. And so the Goes and Match will resolve and then their board is cleared. So I've had pretty good success with that method, and I just like it a lot better because it is, again, like I said, much better at going first when you happen to win dice roll. And it's still okay going second. Obviously, it's not as good as Evenly Matched and Lava Golem, but in most cases, it'll still get the job done. Okay, so time cards. This one is actually really interesting for Labrynth just because of our ability to set and activate any normal trap from deck. People are digging up all kinds of crazy, like old effect damage cards. And so there's a lot of them you could play. Obviously, you only need one of them. There's sort of these two main categories where on my reverse, on this side is sort of the ones where you don't have to tribute a monster. You might do less damage, but you keep your monster up. And then on the other side is the ones where you tribute a monster and maybe get like 3,000 points of damage as opposed to like maybe 1,000, 1,500. And so you can make the case for either one. Personally, I think that the ones where you don't have to tribute your monster might actually be better, because then you get to, like, assuming what you would tribute is your lady, if you keep lady up, then you can continue to plus and like fight off any damage that your opponent could do. Whereas like if you tribute lady for something like destruct potion, okay, you did 3k worth of damage, but like you also now are kind of defenseless. So it really depends on game situation and everything and how much time is actually left. But my preference is the ceasefire or the secret barrel. Kind of take your pick. They're all just pretty old cards, pretty cheap. So, all right, so let's go through a deck profile. This is just what I've been running. Obviously, you can run a bunch of different builds in this deck. So I think, like, ultimately it comes down to what your personal preferences are, but I figured I'd just provide this as a baseline. So as I mentioned, we've got 3 lady, 1 lovely. We are main decking 3 dimension shifter. This is just too good against tier not to be playing. We're playing 3 Ariana, 1 Ku Clock. And so for the pots, I am running 2 duality, 3 extrav. I mentioned in the section with the pots, this is my preferred setup because it gives you a little bit of the plussing and the digging aspect that prosperity has. 2 field spells. I'm running 1 Labrynth for any matchups that aren't graveyard reliant, and then 1 Necro Valley. This is pretty much your win con against tier. Like, Dimension Shifter will buy you time, but then ultimately getting to Necro Valley is like your true win con. Triple Compulse. So this is not once per turn. It bounces to the hand. You can use it on your own monsters to get your Labrynth effects going. I think Compulse is absolutely cracked in the deck 3 of mandatory. 1 Daruma Karma Cannon. This is just a really good towers out. So if there's stuff like Avramax that's unaffected, you can send it with this. So I think this is good to have in the main just for those matchups. You can side it out potentially. A blowout card for everything that's not tier is D Barrier, so this will help a ton. I mean, against pretty much everything except Link decks, you'll be able to just blow them out and potentially loop D Shifter with Lovely, so it's really good. 2 Ichiroku's Ledger Book. So I'm running this. It's not the best removal normal trap, except for the fact that it doesn't interact with the graveyard like a lot of the other ones do. So you can use this under Shifter, you can use this under Necro Valley, and it's not once per turn actually. So I think this is like a pretty decent option to run at 2. It's also viable against Floandries, which I think with this build, Floandries is like your weakest matchup because a lot of these cards just like don't really affect them, like Rivalry and Tears of the Overroot. They just don't care. Necro Valley, they don't care. Shifter, they don't care. So you really need other cards that will help you play against Floandries. So I think Ichiroku's is good for that. 2 Metaverse, just in case one gets milled. But yeah, you can set this off of Lady, put up Necro Valley, and watch Tear cry. So that's pretty sweet. Tears of the Overroot, we're running 1. I know it conflicts with Necro Valley, but really, like in the pre-Big Welcome world, we're just really hurting for removal traps. Same thing with Torrential. I don't think this is that good, but it's good. It's like good enough against Floandries that I think it's worth running. Again, like we just need stuff that can operate under Necro Valley and Shifter. 3 Welcome, no surprise there. 3 Gozen. This is, again, Floandries is a theme here because I feel like I've pretty well taken care of the tier matchup with the way this deck is built. So that means that we're pretty weak to some other matchups. And so I think Gozen matches best into Floandries. Rivalry doesn't do anything to them. So I think like I'm on 2 Rivalry, 3 Gozen. And then triple Solemn Strike. Again, this is sort of my go second strategy. This works really well for me. I think this card is cracked going second just because it's a counter trap, so spell speed higher than monster effects. The extra deck, since I'm not running punishment or any anything that sends from the extra deck, and I'm just running Extrav. This is actually a smokescreen for Dark World in preparation for Kashtira. So I've been theorizing that Kashtira will probably like prefer to lock out, like if they win dice roll and are going blind first, they will likely focus on locking out your monster zones unless they know you're playing Labrynth, right? And that can really work to our advantage in game one, because then you just set 5 and you can start to set 5 back row and you can start to work on taking down their board. So right now this is set up to basically look like Dark World, because they're going to be looking into your extra deck with Unicorn and Diablosis. So if they look in here and they see a bunch of like Elder Entity Entis and like, you know, a bunch of Garuras and stuff like that, they're going to know that you're probably playing Labrynth or some other back row deck. However, if you set up your extra deck with just stuff, and it doesn't have to be these exact cards, with stuff that implies that it's another deck, I think this is a sneaky way to make them think that you're on Dark World and lock out your monster zones. So again, that hasn't really been tested yet, but that's just something I've been theorizing. And it works. Like Dark World is a really good pairing for us because they have a lot of fiends in the extra deck. And so we actually could, in theory, I really never have, but we could in theory make use of some of these extra deck monsters, so it's not a total waste there. In the side, again, I'm running 3 Lord. Your mileage may vary. Running triple Dogwood. I'm not running any of the other time cards that I mentioned. I'm still on Dogwood just because if you're going second in your game going into time, like those time cards aren't really that good. So I'm still running Dogwood just because I don't want to lose in time. That said, I haven't really gone into time that much with this deck because the locks that you put on your opponent are just so oppressive if you get there, right? So like the tier matchup is basically, do you draw Shifter and do you get to Necro Valley fast enough? And if Necro Valley sticks on board, they're going to scoop. If not, you're going to scoop. And so I honestly don't find myself going into time as much as I would think with this deck. So potentially up for review here. The 1 Zombie World for the Flowanderies matchup. The Appointer for going first. The Boo Boo game for the Blowout Punish. The Erad, honestly, you could probably make the case to put this in the main deck as well, over something like potentially the second Ijirokus or the Terrors of the Overroot. So you could potentially do something like this, where you have the Erad in the main deck. This will help you against certain matchups, just having it main decked, but obviously you need to side this for sure. Heavy Storm Duster, this helps to remove back row decks stuff, so I actually kind of like siding this card against back row decks because it'll proc your Labrynth effects as well. The third Rivalry, in case we run into a deck that gets hurt by it, obviously we want to be playing it. And then the triple SJ, as we mentioned, you got to have this, otherwise you're just not going to win as much as you could when you have this. So that's just an idea of a deck profile. Feel free to take this, modify it, whatever. All right, everybody, that's all we have for you today. Hope you enjoyed the video. I would love to discuss everybody's choices with Labrynth, what everybody's playing, so feel free to comment down below. And thanks again for watching.